Hello fellow painters and welcome to another painting tutorial from Promethean Paints. Today we've got the new Chaos Dwarf models for Age of Sigmar. Obviously you can use these for the old world as well. And today we're going to be showing you how to paint the War Despot from the CHORFS. So what I've done is I undercoated the model in AK Tenebrous Grey, which is a very dark purple. It's almost black, so you could undercoat just in your standard black. I wanted just to have a subtle difference as my darkest shade, but to be honest, undercoating in black will be fine. So once you've primed your model in black, the first colour I'm going to be using, for sort of given a brass feel, not going to be using any golds, we're just going to be using brass. So the first is the Citadel layer paint, which is brass scorpion. It's quite a thick layer paint. I managed to do pretty much all of this in one coat, though some of the wider areas do need two coats because it is relatively thin, but it does cover very well. So just go around the model, and anything that you want to be brass, just base coat in the brass scorpion. I don't cover everything here, I show you just how I'm applying the paint, but afterwards, once I've done everything, we'll return just to show you what I've painted. But it's going to be most of the armour is in this colour. Don't worry if you make a little bit of a mess, you can go over and clear it all up or paint over it with different metallics a bit later on, but just cover all the armour in this brass scorpion. Right, with the brass scorpion pretty much applied, there we go, transition to that. We're just going to apply some metallics, silver next, which I'm going to be using Citadel Iron Warrior. It's quite a nice dark silver. You could use lead voucher if you wanted a slightly brighter, but I wanted the silver to be much darker on this, so yeah, Iron Warriors is good. Iron Breaker is also good, any of their silvers. So this is pretty much the beard, a little bit on the arm guards is silver. I've done the shoulder pads in silver as well, but you can see the brass covers quite a lot. His hat, the bottom of his beard, the scales, his gloves, and the back of him is also gold. There are some really good images on the Warhammer websites of how they've painted theirs. Not the colours are a little bit different, but I've pretty much applied the same metallics in the same places they have. Okay, with the metallics applied, we can apply our first wash. And for this, I'm using the Citadel shade Druchii Violet. I just didn't want standard black or Agrax Earth shade, like a dark brown. I wanted to give the brass and silver a bit of flavour. I've seen in the codex, in the battle tome, and on the images, there is a reddish, purplish tint to a lot of their models that they've painted. So to represent that, I'm going to be using this as our shade. So our darkest points will be a very, very dark purple. Druchii Violet is a very, very powerful colour. So just to reduce that, there's about a 50-50 mix on the wet palette there. So a couple of drops of Druchii Violet, a couple of drops of water. And I end up applying 2 thin coats of this across the model. The second coat focusing on those areas that I wanted to be darkest, so the underside of the metallics, around any little rivets or anything like that. Just pick those out on the second coat. Of course, you could just use, if you wanted a dark, you could just use Agrax Earth Shade or Nuln Oil. Don't apply too much, so you don't want it pooling and looking ugly, but when it's watered down it stops that a little bit, and give it a good 10-15 minutes to dry. It does take a while. with the shade applied, we're going to apply our first highlight, and for that I'm using the Citadel Sycorax Bronze, I believe it's called, and this is a nice step up from the Brass Scorpion, and I'm going to be covering probably 80% of that Brass Scorpion colour with this Sycorax Bronze, picking out all of the areas I want to be brighter, leaving some of the Brass Scorpion in the deepest shadows, but yeah, 70 to 80% we're covering here just to make sure we're going to get a nice highlight. Our second highlight, we're going to make a little mix, and we're going to be using Stormhost Silver and the Sycorax Bronze, and it's all pretty much a 50-50, maybe a 70-30 in favour of the Stormhost Silver. It's just so bright, it's blatting out the camera there. And I'm just going to use this to highlight probably about 20% of the metallic areas, picking out the edges, any rivets, just picking those out. Any points that you want to be bright, pick those out with this colour, and it's a nice mid highlight between Sycorax Bronze and Silver. Don't apply too much, less is more when you're doing your highlights. If you apply too many highlights, then there's nothing left to highlight, everything's bright. So you want to have darks to counteract your highlights. done that highlight, then just move to pure Stormhost silver and do tiny little dot highlights on the points you want to be bright. A couple of edge highlights on the top of his helmet, the rivets I pick out, a couple of dots on his fingers around his glove, and on the end points of his armour. Just pick out with subtle pieces, little bits on his scales, not too much again, less is more, little dots across those brightest points. And that's pretty much the metallics done. So here we've gone from a nice brass colour up to a bright silver highlight, and then also using the Stormhost silver just to apply some highlights to the Iron Warriors as well. Little touch highlights again on the silver. At the moment, see, it looks quite garish, quite bright. We're going to be using other colours now to settle down those metallics, so we won't be touching the metallics again until towards the end when we apply our bounce lighting off of our base effects. But just by applying some other colours around the model, starts toning down the brightness of the gold. Right, next up is his sort of cloak and belt. We're going to go for a nice purplish magenta colour. So I'm using three colours for this, which is AK Violet Red, AK Magenta and AK Intense Pink. So you're sort of looking at Citadel Screamer Pink and Pink Horror for these colours, with a sort of dark corn red maybe base coat. We're not going for red here, we're going for a sort of magenta pink finish. So just base coat your model, the material areas in the violet colour. So us is AK Violet Red, but I say a corn red, or the Barak Nabundi colour from Citadel. It's also really good, this sort of colour. So our first highlight is going to be with the magenta, and like highlighting any material, it's a sort of a thicker edge highlight, picking out all of the ridges, raised areas, anything that you want to be brighter. Pick out those areas with this magenta, leaving the violet red in the deepest recesses and shadows. You'll also notice that I went round, after I'd done all of the highlights of the gold, I went back with the Tenebrous Grey and just coloured in all the areas that weren't armour, just to bring them back to a standard colour, so that we had a nice base to work from. There wasn't too much mess, but just clear up any of your mess with your base coat, either black or the Tenebrous Grey. And then the final highlight is with AK Intense Pink. Very subtle highlight. This is a nice dotted, scratchy edge highlight, picking out the edges and any intense raised points. Again, not too much, just your edges and some scratches and marks on the actual material itself. Less is more, but it does serve a purpose, this edge highlight. It starts distinguishing itself from the other colours. So you do need to edge highlight all of it, but as you'll see me doing, I'm not just doing a straight edge across as a highlight on the edge highlighting. I'm doing little dots, dashes, lines, just to mix it up a little bit, give the material some texture instead of just boring flat lines. Our painters, we are cycling through pretty quick. We're now on to doing the leather. Not much on this, just 3 colours. We're using AK Leather Brown, AK Saddle Brown and Citadel Cadian Fleshtone. So the leather brown acts as the base coat. Just go around and base coat all of the leather with the leather brown. There's a little pouch on his front, the gun case, and a clip around his belt, and a little pouch around the back. Not too much. Also do a little bit on his wrist. So yeah, base coat it in leather brown, then do subtle highlights with the saddle brown, thicker edge highlights, really leaving some of that leather brown in the deepest recess. And then the Cadian Fleshtone uses your edge highlight, and use that also to apply some scratches and dents and marks. Okay, now on to his face. Very small face. So we're going to be using Kislev flesh and Flayed one flesh. So base coat any flesh that you've got on this model. It's just on his face. Just base coat that. A couple of coats of the Kislev flesh. Once the Kislev flesh has dried, we are going to be applying a wash, but this is a handmade wash. We're going to be using AK Wine Red, and it's about one tiny drop to about 5, 6, 7 drops of water. Very thin, as you can see there. It's a very strong colour. Citadel would be Vulpus Pink you could use, but again, heavily water it down, and then just apply this wash over all of the Despot's face. It's a nice tonal change. Instead of using a normal flesh wash, this gives a little bit more colour, a little bit just different effect. You could use a sort of a Reikland flesh shade. You could even apply Reikland flesh shade first and then apply this after. I apply a couple of coats of this after each one's dried, and it just gives, obviously the definitions are defined with this colour, and it gives the character a bit more life. Once it's dry, then using the Flayed one flesh, just pick out all the highlights. So I pick out his nose, his eyebrows, his bottom lip and his tusks, a little bit of the cheekbones as well. Now if you're interested, the brush I'm using here is a size 0. It's a size 0 from Raphael. The series is 8402. You can get them in 0 and 00. You can even get 000 size 1. They're my go-to brushes. I think they're really good. They hold their form. They're obviously Kalinsky Sables. Yeah, 8404 is the series. I'll put in the chat, in the comments and description. I'll let you know what brush it is. But I'm using a size 0 here because it's got a really good point. But if you're not confident, just use a small brush like an Artificer or something from Citadel. But a small brush. Small brushes sometimes don't have the finer points, but I find the size 0 has a very fine point, and they last quite a long time. So yeah, just pick out any highlights. Primarily you want the bottom of that lip and cheekbones and eyelids and nose to be picked out. And I then just put a little bit of white on the palette and just paint over the tusks with a little bit of white just to make them stand out a little bit more. And that's his face done. With his face done, slowly getting to complete the model here. Next up are the gems. So I've got some Evil Sunz Scarlet Air there, but obviously if you haven't got the Air version, just use the normal version. The Air version takes a load of coats. It actually didn't cover that well, so I just went back over. I got my other pot of Evil Sunz Scarlet. So just base coat all of the gems in an Evil Sunz Scarlet. If you're using AK paints, which I usually do, then you would use blood red. Okay, then we'll get some white on the palette, and what we're going to do here is just highlight the gems with pure white. And for mine, I'm doing the highlight on the bottom left hand side as you look at the model, and on the bottom left I'm just doing little owl shapes, so from the left hand side and then the little foot of the owl coming out, and that's it for the highlight. So little owl shapes on the bottom left of each of the gems. Once that white is dried, we're going to be using a fluorescent paint. This one's from Green Stuff World, and it's Fluorescent Rose. Really nice colour. It's totally different to fluorescent red. It's like a fluorescent magenta really, but just different tones in it. And these work a little bit like contrast paint, so you've got to give the bottles a really good shake. There's a little ball bearing in the bottom of each one, so when you hear that ball bearing rattle, you know it's shaken well. So yeah, apply it like a contrast paint, not too thick but not too thin, but just make sure that the white that we've just painted is covered with this fluorescent rose. And then once that fluorescent rose is dry, as a final highlight, I use the white and do tiny little dots in the bottom left hand corner, just to make that highlight pop a little bit more. Okay, now we're going to move on to putting some effects onto the horns from his helmet. So I'm going to use a few colours here. I'm going to be using AK Black Green, which would be Citadel Caliban Green. Ignore the green skin punch, I don't use that at all. And then I move on to AK Deep Green, which would be, is it the Warpstone Green from Citadel? Moot Green also, but Moot Green is very, very bright. You might just need to tone down Moot Green a little bit, but certainly, yeah, Warpstone Green I think is that sort of mid-tone deep green colour. So first off, just base coat all of the horns with your dark green. So I'm using AK Black Green, but yeah, Caliban Green would also be good from the Citadel range. Okay, so with your bright green, so there is AK deep green there, we're going to be edge highlighting first the horns. They're quite well defined, the edges, so make sure you just edge highlight those. Quite a thick edge highlight, thicker than you would normally do, because what I'm imagining is these are going to have white highlight inside of them. So we're making a little hot dog. So the bright green here is the bun, the white is the sausage of the highlight. So a thicker bright green highlight, and we're just making, I'd say, lightning bolts on them, but it's just jaggedy lines stretching out from those central highlights that we've just done. Again, I'm using the size 0 brush, which, you know, an artificial size brush from Games Workshop. Just make sure it's got a nice point on it. The paint is a little bit watered down. It's a few drops of paint to 1 drop of water, and obviously it's watered down a bit on the wet palette itself, but just carefully and steadily. I do have quite a shaky hand on my right hand, but just brace the model, get comfortable, and apply your little shapes. If you get it wrong, don't worry, just repaint it again. Just go back over it in the black green and start again. It's very thin, there's not much detail on these horns, so you're not going to cover anything up. Don't worry about making mistakes. Failing is good, it shows that you're trying, so just give them a few go. Even practice if you need to on a separate model. Just painting these fine lines comes with practice. Okay, so once you've done that, then put some of your pure white on the wet palette. Skull white, I use AK Intense White. Skull white is okay. I know that has got a bit of a bad rep. There are a number of good whites out there. Certainly if you're having trouble with Skull white, try the AK Intense Pure White. I've used it and I've never gone back. I think it's an amazing colour. It's good straight out of the pot, and it waters down well as well. So with this, as I mentioned, we're just using this to do a subtle highlight, picking out little bits of our bright green that we've just applied and just making little marks on it, picking out some of these central points of those highlights, not covering all of it. It's probably 10% of our little highlight lines, but just make sure you do a full edge highlight, the top ends of the horn where it gets pointy, it comes together in a little triangle, a little pyramid. Just highlight those in pure white, because that's going to be our final bright point of our horns. final highlight, well, second to final highlight, get some AK fluorescent green, give it a good shake, put some on the palette, and a bit like the fluorescent rose colour, apply it like a contrast, and just paint over all of the green that we've just done and the white, making sure to fully cover the white. So you'll need to keep dipping into your brush because it is quite a thick paint, but it needs to go on relatively thick. You'll learn how to use it the more and more you use it. The final push of brightness, nothing highlights green like a nice yellow, so the AK fluorescent yellow, good shake, a little bit on the palette, and just highlight the very tips of the horns where you did those full highlights, the white highlight, just highlight the full tips, a couple of little dots. You'll see I'm almost dragging the paint onto it because there's an edge highlight. By dragging it, it leaves a nice thick amount of paint on there to really make that greenish yellow pop. So there's two extra little fluorescent green bits. There's a little symbol on his belt buckle, and he's got a green ring. So just paint those in the same way as you did the horns. So just black. Instead of going to the black green, just use your AK deep green or moot green, then a little dot of white, and then a little dot of fluorescent green, just to highlight those areas. The ring is a very small detail on his finger, so yeah, just take care. A little line of green, a little dot of white, and a little bit of fluorescent will pick those items out easily. Right, so that's the model done at this point. The next stages are sort of optional, and they do rely on you having an airbrush. You could do this without an airbrush. So the sword here, if you don't have an airbrush, the sword you could paint the same way we did the horns. So base coat it in black green, use your bright green to create little sharp electrical shapes coming out of the area and picking out the little runes that are on the sword and edge highlighting it, then a little white highlight, and then pick out those white bits with the fluorescent green paint. You could create a really cool sword like that. I was tempted to do it like that, and I may do that for the squads and other characters, but for this one I wanted to do some other bits and bobs. So what I've got there in that pot, that's a Citadel contrast pot, but I've created a whitewash. So that uses Vallejo white ink, water and contrast medium. So it's 1 drop of white ink to 2 drops of water to 1 drop of contrast medium. And so obviously I've made a big batch of it and lobbed it into a pot, so I don't have to keep making it all the time. But it creates a nice white contrast wash that flows nicely into the areas. So for the sword, I use the wash to help run into any recesses, and then I'm using pure white to edge highlight all the way around the sword. So what we've done is we've picked out all the edges in pure white, we've picked out the runes in the white ink wash, and there's some runes and symbols at the bottom of the sword sort of spear as well. I also pick out the central point of the sword, that centre point there, and I make some little scratch marks and lines and stuff just to look like those electric bits that we had on the horns. The base is a small piece of cork from Amazon, it's just corkboard, 5mm or 10mm thickness. I think it's the 5mm thickness stuff. I then used to create this sort of lava-y type stuff on the base. I used the Liquitex acrylic medium gloss gel. It takes about an hour to dry, so you need to have it prepared in advance, but just apply it and it makes it look a little bit like flowing lava. And if I'd applied it slightly differently, so I was spiking the brush down onto the medium itself, so I created little spikes. And then the flame itself is from Deadly Print Studios. It's a 3D bit that I got bought from them. They do loads of stuff as well. If you're looking for like flame bits and smoke bits, it's where my go-to company. You can buy the STLs or buy the prints complete, and they'll ship them to you. So that's just a flame bit stuck down and a little skull from the Citadel skull box into the corner. But obviously, base it however you wish. These bits, how I base it is optional, but I'm showing if you wanted to do it how you would do it. So I completely paint the flame in white, and I pick out the skull's eyes and mouth in pure white. So through the airbrush, some Vallejo white ink, and what I'm going to do here is create some halos around the skull's eyes and mouth, create the halo around the flame, and then just pick out the areas that I want to be bright on the base, where that sort of green lava is going to be. I just pick out with the airbrush any bright points, so focusing the white on the areas I want to be brightest and letting the natural work of the airbrush create the gradients, or halos as I call them, around. I do the same on the sword, focusing so you get some nice blends across the sword, using the natural haloing effect just to create some nice brights to darks that we're going to go over in the fluorescent paint. Be careful if you're going to be doing this. You might want to cover up the model with some putty or masking tape so that you don't overspray. I'm using short sharp bursts from the overspray, making sure the brush is pointed completely away from the miniature and quite close. That's not an expensive airbrush. That is a £30 airbrush from Fengda off of Amazon. My entire airbrush setup is less than £100. They don't have to be expensive. You don't have to spend a lot of money on an airbrush, and I may do a series on using an airbrush, but it does take a bit of practice. It's a little hobby within a hobby, but I find it's an essential tool for some of the effects that I do, and sometimes I think it's an essential tool if you're building big armies, because you can prime and base models so quick with an airbrush and get some really good effects very, very quick. Dry brushing can also be used to simulate an airbrush, but it's not the same. So if you're thinking about it, I thoroughly recommend getting a cheaper one first and then spending the money if you want to, but like I say, that's a £30 airbrush. So anyway, after I've waffled on a bit there, next step's pretty simple. Any of the white now, I've got some AK Fluorescent Green, a little drop of water in there as well, because it does need a little bit of help to get through the airbrush, and I just completely cover all the white in the Fluorescent Green. I wouldn't paint this on. The fluorescent paints paint well over small areas. They don't do well from the brush on the large areas. give your green a little bit of a time to dry, and then back to your sort of white wash that we made. And what I'm doing here is I'm just now adding some to the bottom of the flame so that the flame and the base blend together. And I'm just going to add some more of this white just to areas where I'm going to be overpainting those in yellow, because we know that yellow really highlights green. So just apply some of those anywhere that you want to be really, really bright. Just apply a little bit of that whitewash to it, so the eyes of the skull, bottom of the flame, a couple of dots on the base itself where I think the green lava would be hot, and just some areas on the sword as well, picking out the runes a little bit on the base of the sword as well. To highlight the sword, I'm just using the pure white from the wet palette, not the wash, just the pure white, and just doing some little bit of edge highlighting and picking out any of those little scratches and lightning bits. Okay, now we're just going to do some bounce reflections, or OSL, and for that I'm just going to grab some of that black green, and I'm just going to apply this onto some of the dwarfs areas where I want the green to be reflected. So the base of the sword, the base of his feet, around the armour, and the sort of lower areas of his beard. I want those just to reflect a little bit of the green, just a little bit. So yeah, just paint those areas just using the black green. And then with a little bit of white, just highlight those areas, so almost edge highlighting. So where that black green is, just make sure you do a tiny little edge highlight or dot highlight in the areas that you want to have the bright green bouncing back. And then once that white is dry, just go over those areas with the fluorescent green, like we did with the horns and on the sword originally, just picking those out with the green fluorescent to make those highlights really pop. Okay, and finally, now that all of that whitewash should be dry, grab some of your fluorescent yellow, and the areas that you just did as the whitewash, so on the base, on the sword, just pick those out with the fluorescent yellow, and that will really make that green pop. And so just to show, I'm going to dim the lights a little bit, and what it'll do is it will show you what we've created. Quite an impressive effect, relatively straightforward to do. You see the darkness into the lightness from your dark greens to fluorescent green to fluorescent yellow. Lovely contrast between your brights and your darks, which is your hots and your colds. So what I'm going to do next is just to darken down some of the flame and the sword. So just got some black green and Tenebrous Grey on a bit of tissue, and just going to do a little bit of dry brushing. I'm going to dry brush the flame so that the top is dark, and just apply some little darkening areas, some shadows to the sword, just to bring that down a little bit in subtle areas, and then using the Tenebrous Grey as a final almost touch highlight on the smoke and the top of the lava and a bit of the sword spear, just to darken it down, just to show some coldness next to the heat. Almost like if you had a lava sword, you'd use your Tenebrous Grey and dark colours to be your cold points. That's what we're doing here. Just imagine the lava is green, but it's the same feeling as your sort of reds and yellows, so the dark areas is your cold. That's how it predominantly works with these effects. Dark is cold, bright is hot. Okay, so I painted the base of the model in black and applied some Gamer Grass tufts. They got some Alien World Gamer Grass tufts, so I think are really good. And there he is, the Chaos Dwarf War Despot. You can obviously apply these skills and techniques to all the other Chaos Dwarf models. I will be covering them in separate tutorials, but I believe this one will give you everything you need to be able to paint an absolutely stunning looking army. Next up will be the sort of war machines, which will be applying the same effects to. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed painting this little chorf. Wish you all the best in painting yours. Like, comment and subscribe and do all those amazing YouTube things. And as always, happy painting, my friends.